And you can't do that without removing its cause, which is class monopoly over ownership and control of the means of producing the wealth. And to remove that, you'll have to remove also the means, the mechanism that the economy uses to value things, whether it's commodities or work, labour. So that means removing prices, wages, and money. And just in case that isn't off-putting enough, this change, this revolutionary change, can't be localised. Glenn mentioned this as well. It really has to be achieved as part of a global movement. Now, when I first heard that case, many years ago, I thought, what a load of utopian rubbish. In fact, the second time I heard it, I still thought it was utopian rubbish. It took a few times for it to sink in. You have to keep a few balls in the air, as it were, because politically we're so used to dealing with problems one at a time. Let's deal with that problem. Let's ban that, first of all. Let's stop that. Let's deal with this. There's a bit of a leap required to keep all these ideas in your head and envisage how socialism could be, identify that it can address so many of the social problems that bedevil capitalism. So I've certainly got no illusions in the case for genuine socialism is a daunting one. And it also begs as many questions as it answers. Questions that people may want to bring up during the question time. I won't be answering these questions, but who will do the dirty work? That's a common question. Why won't people take more than they need from the common store? That's a common question also. Won't there be chaos without the market guiding production and distribution? So I won't be addressing these questions, but we can pick up on these later if anybody wants to. So socialism, in summary, would be a moneyless, wageless, classless and stateless world community. In many ways, that's the only difference from capitalism. The rest of it won't change that much. That's a joke, by the way. What changes are the... It's bad news when you have to tell people that was a joke. What changes there would be in the priorities for production. There'll be lots of changes, obviously, and we just don't know. They are unknown unknowns, aren't they? But certainly one important change, I think very important to this discussion, global warming, is in the changes in the priorities for production. And it's there that we can start to address why we think socialism can provide a pretty good response to the challenge of climate change. Now, there have been very, very few studies looking at structural waste inside capitalism. It's not a subject that wins research grants for obvious reasons. But the few assessments that there have been suggest that the extent of waste of labour inside capitalism is immense. When you strip away the useless jobs, essential to capitalism, but useless to socialism, when you strip away the useless jobs, the sheer scale of the waste starts to become apparent. I put a wee list here of just some examples of the types of economic activity, the types of jobs. I'm sure you've all seen these before, which are absolutely redundant within a socialist society. And I'll just flesh out a couple of these in a bit more detail. The defence industry, the military, is of course an immense consumer of labour and resources, and it has an immense impact on the environment in its own right. But it's not just the obvious waste of labour. The soldiers and such like. For every 100 people employed on an army base, there'll be another 4, 5, 6 people who are employed to maintain it, doing what you would normally think was being socially useful jobs. Joiners, plumbers, electricians. Very useful jobs, but not if they're maintaining an RAF base. And what about military research? Apparently 50%, and don't ask me for the origin of this, I'll have to get back to you on that one, but it's a figure that I've heard for some time now. 50% of global R&D, research and development, is spent on military applications. So you could take all the scientists in the world, and half of them could go away and do something better inside a socialist society, rather than working on military applications. The research body Forrester Consultants published a report looking at innovation in the food industry. What proportion of research and development in that industry is genuinely novel, was the question they asked. What figure did they come up with? How many of the researchers in the food industry are actually doing what might be called socially useful work? 4% is the figure they came up with. So 96 out of 100 researchers in the food industry are just cloning competitors' products, basically, doing little more than that. The more you look, and it's something I don't think we in the Socialist Party have probably done enough of, but the more you look, the more you just realise just how much waste there is inside capitalism. We'll strip out the lawyers, obviously. We might want a few of them to stay to help with dispute resolution and such like, but law is 90% property. So get rid of most of the lawyers. What about all the people handling or counting money, from the shop assistant to the security guards, taking the money away, the banks processing it, all the company salary clerks, all the credit control departments, all the people working for inland revenues, the VAT departments, and then all the people in the financial sector, the life insurance, the pensions industry, and then the City of London, which we are, I'm pleased to say, we're within spitting distance here, as I understand it. How would socialism cope without the bond traders and the hedge funds and the derivatives dealers and so on? And then there's the less obvious activities, perhaps. Advertising, marketing, sales, the brand consultant that I quoted from earlier. Go and do something more useful. Do we need all this advertising? Does anyone really need to tell you that if you need food, you can go to a supermarket? Does anyone need to tell you that if you want to drink a beer, you go to a pub? I don't think so. I always find it funny in Scotland, in October every year, they have a week, Scottish Pub Week, a festival to encourage the people of Scotland to leave the sports centres and to leave their house and don't talk to their family. No, get out of the house, go to your local pub, try and find it, might be hard, and sample the fare in there. You don't need to encourage people to do this, they do it anyway. Another industry, what about the media? Well, we still want entertainment and information and news and all that, but increasingly a large proportion of the media sector is, to all intents and purposes, part of the advertising sector. You take your average newspaper, if you cut out the adverts, there's not a lot left afterwards. And what would be the spin-offs from this? As I say, it all adds up. If there's no advertising in your local newspaper, that means less paper getting produced, less paper mill workers needing to do that job, less ink needed for the advertising, less work for the chemical industry to write that. What about the packaging and printing industry? Some of it is useful, sure, but a lot of it isn't. You need some packaging for food hygiene reasons, health and safety, fire protection, that sort of thing. But a large proportion of this product is nothing more than advertising. And if less people are having to work or are working fewer days, that means fewer cars needed for the daily commute. Currently, for every 20 cars in Britain, only one is being used at any time. 19 are just parked there. We live in one big car park. With reduced car usage, that will presumably mean less requirement for car production, for garaging services, and so on. It multiplies up and multiplies up. I could go on, and I'm sure you realise that. But instead of me going on, a useful thing to do is just think about your own job, or the last job you had, and think about how socially useful that job was. Glenn talked about being a tree surgeon. And most people, as he said, would think, oh, what a great job. How useful, practical, working with nature. But as he's saying, there's all these bits to it that actually mean you're not doing your job properly. And it's frustrating. I'm in exactly the same boat. I